You and those triplets are the stain of my life.
Can you imagine this? Right after giving birth to triplets, a woman lies weak in a hospital bed, only to hear her husband say in front of doctors, "You and those bastards are the shame of my life." Then he walks away, just like that. No guilt, no goodbye. But that was just the beginning. He spread lies across the village, claiming the children weren't his. Their mother, Abeni, became a pariah. The children? Mocked, shunned, called bastards. Even Abeni's own sister turned her back on them. In the pouring rain, 3 little souls clung to each other and made a vow. One day we'll clear our mother's name. 15 years later, they return, no longer children. Oba, a fierce attorney. Jelani, a forensic financial expert. Zuri, an investigative journalist with a powerful voice. And now, it's time to put their father on trial. They uncover stolen medical funds, hush money, and ties to a powerful, corrupt official. Just when the public begins to rally behind Abeni, Kwame fights back with a deep-fake video proving she cheated. The world turns on her. Again, in court, Kwame's mistress drops the final bomb, a recording of Abeni allegedly admitting the kids aren't his. The jury is shaken. Abeni collapses. It feels over, but it's not. In the final moments, Jelani presents undeniable financial trails and hush payments. A tech expert dismantles the deepfake. DNA confirms the triplets are his biological children. Zuri. She's married to the son of a fearless judge who ensures justice is served. Kwame is convicted. Abeni's name is cleared. Her sister begs forgiveness. And on the courthouse steps, frail but proud, Abeni clasps her children's hands. Applause erupts, and she speaks one final line. The truth never dies. Abeni's eyelids fluttered open to a white so bright it stung, a white so sterile it didn't feel real, ceiling tiles, buzzing lights, the slow drip of an IV, and then that smell, bleach, iodine, something sharp and metallic like dried blood. It clung to her tongue, lodged behind her teeth. She tried to swallow it down, couldn't. Her throat ached. Her body felt like it had been emptied and stitched back by strangers. A monitor beeped steadily beside her. Somewhere behind her head, a curtain swayed slightly, moved by air that didn't smell like air at all. Her fingers searched the sheet for something, anything familiar, warm, human. Then she saw him. Kwame stood at the foot of her bed, not holding flowers, not smiling. His hands were buried in the pockets of a gray suit she hadn't seen before. The fabric looked expensive, sharp, too clean. His face was unreadable, like a closed book. But his eyes, they weren't the eyes of a husband who had waited by her side. Her lips moved, dry. Kwame. Just his name, no accusation, no plea, just a hope. He stepped forward, slowly, not to touch her, not to kiss her forehead, but to set something down on the metal tray beside her bed. A file, thick, stapled, signed. Her eyes flicked from the paper to his face. His voice dropped like a weight. "I want you to understand this now, so we don't have to revisit it later," he said. "I've settled the bill for your surgery, just this once. But I won't pay for anything else. Not the room, not the nurses, not the aftercare. Not for you, and especially not for them." Them? Her stomach tightened. She turned her head, wincing at the pain, and saw the ultrasound photo taped to the wall, the one with the 3 blurry shapes, 3 perfect shadowy curls of life. "Kwame!" Her voice cracked. "They're your children." "No," he said. They're your shame. She blinked. Surely she had misunderstood. But he didn't stop. You brought disgrace to this family, he said, voice cold as the IV line in her vein. You told people they were mine, lied, paraded them like trophies. Like I'd be proud of that circus act. Triplets? Really? Abeni's chest heaved, but there was no breath, only air that wouldn't reach her lungs. And now, Kwame said, reaching into his jacket, I'm setting the record straight. He pulled out another envelope, this one thinner, a printed declaration notarized. He read it aloud, each word slicing clean. This document confirms that I, Kwame Otieno, have no biological connection to the children born on March 3rd, and hereby waive all parental and financial responsibility. I encourage the hospital staff to update all records accordingly. He turned to the nurse who had just entered with a clipboard. Her expression froze. He handed her the envelope, then looked back at Abeni. I'm not your husband anymore, he said. I'm just a man who was foolish enough to believe you. And then Amara appeared, from behind the curtain, young, lipstick flawless. Her high heels made no sound on the linoleum. She walked up beside him like she'd always belonged there. Abeni stared. The world shrunk. Let's go, Amara whispered to Kwame, brushing invisible dust from his collar. They'll be fine. He nodded, didn't glance back. They left. The door hissed closed behind them. But it didn't end there. Minutes later, maybe hours, time had collapsed. Abeni heard whispers just outside the door. Doctors, nurses. Her husband said the babies weren't his. They look nothing like him anyway. It's always the quiet ones. And then, oh, poor man, she pressed her palms to her ears, but the sound leaked in anyway. Through the vents, through the floor. Her body trembled, not from pain, but from something deeper. Shame, abandonment, a severing no scalpel could fix. She reached with shaking fingers toward the drawer by the bed. Her wrist hurt. Her stitches throbbed. But she found it. A photo, bent at the corners, worn soft from prayers. Oba, Jelani, Zuri, still in the womb. The last scan. The one she'd hidden in her pocket when they wheeled her in. 3 names, 1 mother. A future carved in defiance. Her thumb brushed over the image. Her tears blurred the photo, but her vision tunneled. A nurse entered. She looked startled, maybe even pitying. Would you like me to call someone for you? She asked gently. Family? Abeni didn't answer. She couldn't. There was no one left. That night, alone in the darkness of the room, long after the machines were silenced, long after the whispers died, Abeni stared at the ceiling, not blinking, not sleeping. Her fingers gripped the photo so tightly, the edges left crescent moons in her skin. The monitor pulsed beside her like a countdown, not toward death, but toward something else. Resolve. She closed her eyes, not to rest, but to remember. The names, the weight of 3 small bodies moving inside her. The songs she hummed to them when no one else listened. The way each heartbeat felt like a rebellion. They had been unwanted, labeled mistakes, curses, but they were hers, all hers. And if the world chose to call them shadows, then she would become the storm that swallowed the sun. She opened her eyes, blinked once, then again. Outside the window, rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then harder, beating against the glass like fingers trying to break through. She turned her face toward the sound and whispered, I will not die here. Her voice was hoarse, almost silent, but it didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be true. Somewhere in the hallway, a nurse adjusted the IV drip. Somewhere, Amara laughed over wine. Somewhere, Kwame deleted his past and planned his next move. But in that room, under that ceiling light, Abeni's will solidified like bone, not for revenge, not yet, but for Oba, for Jelani, for Zuri. If the world wanted a villain, it would not be her. If the world wanted silence, it would not get it. She reached for the call button, pressed it once. The light blinked red. The hallway stirred. She sat up slowly, ignoring the pain. Blood ran down her side. She didn't flinch. Her other hand still clutched the photo, and in her eyes, not tears, but a quiet, ancient fire, the kind that waits, not to burn, but to rise. Stone struck flesh. The sound was soft at first, a wet thud, then another, louder, sharper, then laughter, shrill and echoing across the dusty schoolyard. Oba didn't cry out. He stood still, jaw clenched, shoulders squared. A line of sweat ran down the back of his neck. Jelani took the second hit, a rock catching him just beneath the ribs. He staggered, gasped, but didn't fall. Zuri, smallest, fastest, moved between her brothers, arms outstretched like a bird protecting its wings. "Stop!" she shouted. "Stop throwing!" But the group of children across the yard only laughed harder. More rocks flew. Someone spat. Bastards. Witch-born. Your mama's a whore. They ain't got no daddy. Their teacher, old Mr. Tembo, stood on the steps of the classroom, watching, arms crossed, eyes empty. The bell hadn't rung. The day hadn't started, but the war had. Dust rose around the triplets like smoke. Oba didn't move. Jelani reached for Zuri, but her fists were clenched. Her dress was torn near the hem. A cut ran down her shin. She didn't seem to notice. The biggest boy in the group, a thick-shouldered kid named Lamin, stepped forward, grinning. "My father said your mama begged in the hospital like a stray dog," he sneered. Said even the nurses felt dirty touching her. Oba's fist twitched. "Shut up," Zuri whispered, trembling. Lamin laughed. "She ain't even know who your father is," he added. "3 babies, 3 daddies, that's what my auntie said." The final stone came faster than the others. It hit Oba square in the chest. He didn't flinch, but the photo in his hand fell, the one he kept folded behind his notebook. The scan of the 3 of them curled like commas in their mother's belly. It landed face down in the dust. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, Oba bent down, picked it up, brushed the dirt away. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady. "You'll regret that." Lamin rolled his eyes. "What did you say?" Oba looked up. There was something ancient in his gaze. Not the eyes of a 12-year-old. Not even a boy. A storm. "I said," Oba repeated. "You'll regret that." The crowd fell quiet. For a moment, even the air stilled. Then a shout came from across the field. A teacher, dismissive, late. "Enough, inside, now!" The other children scattered. The stones remained. Later, in the cafeteria, no one sat with the triplets. Trays scraped, spoons clattered, but the bench around them stayed empty like a wound. Jelani didn't touch his food. Zuri's rice had gone cold. Oba kept the photo under his palm. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. This had become routine. Whispers in the corridors. Backs turned in the village. At the corner store, their mother's name was spoken only in hushed curses. At church, no one sat in their pew. At night, even the wind seemed to keep its distance from their home. They had become ghosts, breathing but not seen, moving but not welcomed. That afternoon, under a sky too gray for noon, they walked home along the path behind the fields. a stretch of dry land, lined with brittle weeds and the bones of old sugar cane. Zuri's voice broke the silence. "Do you think she's okay?" Jelani looked up. "Mama." She nodded. Her eyes were red from dust, or something else. "She smiled this morning," Oba said, his voice flat. But it didn't reach her eyes. Jelani kicked a stone off the path. "She used to sing while she cooked. Remember?" Zuri bit her lip. "She hasn't sung since he left," Oba finished. The wind picked up. Leaves swirled in small, angry circles. They reached the back gate of the yard, a rusted frame hung with wire. Beyond it, the small tilting house stood quiet, curtains drawn. The garden was overgrown. A water basin sat overturned, collecting dust, but it was the stone that called to them. In the center of the backyard, half buried, worn smooth by decades of rain, was a boulder the size of a dinner table. No one knew who placed it there. Some said it had been there before the village was built. Their mother once called it the listening stone. She told them stories about ancestors who whispered into it and buried their vows beneath its weight. They hadn't touched it in years, but now, without a word, they moved toward it. Zuri was the first to kneel. Jelani joined her, resting both palms on the warm surface. Oba stood last, one hand still clenched around the photograph. The sky darkened. Wind rose. Distant thunder grumbled like an old god waking. Zuri closed her eyes. "We are not bastards," she whispered. Jelani spoke next. "Well, we are not mistakes." Oba stepped forward, placed the photo on the stone between them. "Mama gave everything," he said, "and we will give it back." Raindrops landed, soft at first, then heavier. "We swear," Zuri said, voice trembling. "One day," Jelani echoed. "We'll return her name," Oba said. Their hands touched. The rain poured. Inside the house, Abeni stood by the window. Her hands clutched a dish towel, twisting it into knots. Her body still ached from the surgery. Her sleep came in shreds. But she heard their voices through the rain, faint, clear, like bells through fog. She didn't wipe the tears. She let them fall. Later that week, Abeni walked to the home of her younger sister, Mari. It was her last hope. The triplets' tuition was overdue. The village had cut her from the community water. At the clinic, they turned her away, said her records were flagged. Mari lived in a new house on the ridge. Brick, proper glass windows, polished steps. Abeni climbed them slowly, knocked twice. Then again. The door opened. Mari's face didn't change. Abeni smiled thin. "I need your help." "I heard," Mari said. "They've been throwing stones at your children." Abeni's throat tightened. "They're just scared." "Are they?" Mari leaned against the doorframe. "Or are they just telling the truth you never dared say out loud?" Abeni's eyes widened. "You believe them?" "I believe," Mari said coldly, "that every action has a cost. You chose your path. Don't bring your mess to my doorstep." "They're your blood," Abeni whispered. "They're your niece and nephews." Mari's gaze flickered just for a second, then hardened. "I have a family to protect. My husband works for the mayor now. You bring nothing but trouble." Abeni stepped back. Mari didn't apologize. The door closed, firm, final. Abeni stood on the steps for a long time. The sky was too bright. Her feet ached. Her heart felt like glass that had already cracked once, then shattered again, but refused to stop trying to hold water. She turned, walked down the hill. Back home, Oba waited by the door. Jelani was sweeping the yard. Zuri sat on the porch, stitching a tear in her school bag. Abeni didn't speak. She just walked past them, into the house. The triplets didn't ask. They already knew. That night it rained again. 3 shadows crept into the backyard. Oba carried a candle. Jelani brought a pencil. Zuri held a piece of cloth. They knelt by the listening stone. Zuri unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a single button from their mother's favorite blouse, lost months ago, still holding the faintest trace of her lavender soap. Oba lit the candle. Jelani wrote one word on the stone: justice. The flame flickered. The wind paused, and somewhere, beneath the earth, something old and watching began to stir. A single gavel strike echoed in the marble courtroom. Sharp, final, then silence. Oba stood spine straight, suit pressed, eyes locked on the judge's bench. The opposing counsel had just delivered their closing argument. Slick, confident, layered with charm and half-truths. But Oba didn't blink, not once. He waited, hands clasped behind his back, letting the weight of the room press in. Across the aisle, a man in a navy blazer refused to meet Oba's gaze. Mr. Bernard Duval, CEO of Eastgate Holdings, accused of embezzling over $18 million from small-scale pensioners in a scheme so cruel it made headlines for weeks. Oba's fingers flexed at his side. The judge leaned forward. "Counselor Oba Nkemdiche, you may proceed with your rebuttal." Oba stepped into the center of the room, not hurried, not hesitant. Your Honor," he began, voice smooth but edged like tempered glass. "The law isn't just paper. It breathes, it bleeds, and when you steal from those who have nothing left to give, the law does not forget. Neither do their children." A pause. Then he moved closer to the jury. "In the ledger submitted as Exhibit 7, he said, holding up a file with a single gloved hand, "you'll find an anomaly, a name, Errol K., listed as a shell director on 3 offshore accounts tied to Eastgate. But what Mr. Duval's team failed to mention is that Errol K. is his brother, a convicted fraudster, and the person who cashed out these accounts 1 month before the scheme collapsed." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Duval's attorney stiffened. Oba placed the file gently on the table, as if laying down a final piece in a puzzle. "I don't care if the suit is clean or the tie is silk. Theft is theft." Then he bowed slightly to the bench. "No further statements." The judge nodded. The gavel struck again. Oba turned away, but not before he caught the flicker of fear in Duval's eyes. That was enough. He stepped out of the courtroom, jaw clenched against the humidity. Outside, the city was pulsing. Horns, voices, flashes of camera shutters. His face was already on half the news tickers. Oba Nkemdiche, the prosecutor with no mercy. He hated the name, not because it wasn't true, but because it wasn't enough. No mercy was only half the truth. No forgetting was the other. He walked past the press, past the questions, past the flurry of microphones, until he reached a silver car parked just across the street. The engine was already running. Jelani sat in the driver's seat, tie loosened, eyes scanning a tablet loaded with transaction logs. "You torched him," Jelani said without looking up. "Should have seen his hands, twitching." Oba slid in. "Any updates?" Jelani tapped the screen. "Plenty." They drove through the city. Neon lights reflected off tinted windows. Billboards blinked with glossy advertisements. But behind the glass of every high-rise, Jelani saw numbers. Accounts, fund transfers, fraudulent signatures. To him, the city wasn't built on steel and glass. It was built on loopholes. "I traced another shell company," Jelani said, voice low, "registered under Blue Ash Logistics. Guess whose name showed up?" Oba turned. Jelani glanced over. "Kwame." The car fell silent. Oba's jaw tightened. He leaned forward. "Repeat that." Jelani flipped the tablet, showing a transaction trail. I found a payment chain, he said, tapping. Medical funds meant for underdeveloped clinics, routed through Kwame's consultancy, then to offshore accounts. This one's not just fraud, it's personal. The breath between them stilled. Oba looked out the window. The night blurred. Zori was waiting when they arrived. Her apartment was stacked high with books and notepads and old cameras. Newsprint lined the table. Half a dozen photographs of corporate buildings covered the wall. Kwame's face circled in red in one of them. He's building something, she said as they entered. A front. Media, medicine, even policy lobbying. It's spreading like mold. She didn't look up from her laptop. But here's what you'll care about, she added, scrolling. The screen showed a leaked memo. Internal. Confidential. Stamped with a red insignia. Oba leaned in. Jelani's eyes narrowed. Zori's voice dropped. This document, she said, confirms Kwame was the silent director of a firm that received diverted health funds. Funds traced back to Mama's foundation. Oba's hand clenched. Jelani's breath left him. He stole from her, Oba said, and built his empire on it. Zori nodded. And that's not the worst part. She opened another file. It was her name on the original paperwork. He used her credibility to legitimize the transfer. Without her knowledge, Oba staggered back. For a moment, no one moved. The rain began to fall outside. Steady, relentless. Oba sat down slowly. The room felt colder, the lights harsher. He buried her, he whispered, not just with shame, but with theft. Zori turned off the screen. We take it back, she said. Everything. Jelani leaned against the wall, eyes far away. He'll have defenses, political friends, money. Then we go through them, Oba said, one by one. He stood. The vow we made under that stone, he said, wasn't just about names. It was about truth. Zori moved to her shelf, pulled out a small square box. She opened it. Inside was a worn ribbon. Purple. Faded. Abeni's favorite hair tie. From years ago. Before the hospital. Before the rumors. Before the shame. Zori tied it around her wrist. Let's begin. They arrived at the hospital past midnight. The wing smelled of bleach and fatigue. Nurses moved like shadows. The walls were quiet. The machines beeped like distant birds. Abeni lay in bed, pale, frail, but her eyes flickered open the moment they entered, as if she'd been waiting, as if she'd known. She didn't speak. Oba sat beside her, his briefcase still clutched. Jelani placed a printout on the nightstand. Zori adjusted the IV drip without a word, then silence. Oba opened the briefcase, took out a single folder. This is everything, he said softly. Every transaction, every signature, every lie. Abeni didn't move. Zori took her hand. Oba's voice cracked for the first time in years. Ma, he whispered, he didn't just leave you. He stole from you, from your name, from your work. We have proof. Abeni blinked, slowly, then again. And then her lips moved, barely audible. Don't let it die with me. Oba froze. Jelani closed his eyes. Zori pressed her hand tighter. Abeni turned her head, toward the window, toward the rain. Her other hand reached, weak, shaking, for something on the bedside tray. She pulled out the ultrasound photo, the same one Oba had carried, the one she had kept through every room, every transfer, every silence. She placed it between them. Remember, she said, why you were born together. Then her eyes closed, not from sleep, but from trust. Oba leaned back. The photo stayed on the blanket, damp from her fingertips, creased at the edges, but whole. Outside, thunder rolled low in the sky, but inside, a vow had just been reborn. The screen blinked once, then froze. Jelani sat still in the glow of the monitors, sweat collecting at the nape of his neck. Not from heat, from what he was seeing. Transaction 85989D TR $750,000 withdrawn from a medical development grant. Destination Veritas Holdings Ltd. Account opened under a false address in Zurich. Account holder K. Otieno. His hand hovered over the mouse. A cold current ran through his spine. He zoomed in. Next transfer, $300,000 routed to an interior ministry contractor listed as inactive. A different account number, but the same name appeared again in the metadata. Faint, hidden in the encryption layers, but unmistakable. Kwame. He stared at the data, then ran the scan again. Clean source, clean output. This wasn't guesswork. This was theft. He leaned back, eyes darting to the wall where photos of their mother hung, framed in modest black wood. One of her planting a sapling in front of the old clinic, one holding a stethoscope in one hand and a newborn in the other. Her smile reached her eyes in that photo. Jelani's didn't. He clicked deeper into the audit trail. A name surfaced, a government official, Minister Bako, known for clean suits and rehearsed compassion. Jelani felt bile rise. A ping interrupted the silence. Encrypted message. Sender unknown. Subject. Your mother's blood paid for this. Attached. A PDF. One photo. A receipt for private jet services, billed to a shell company tied to the health fund. He stared at the timestamp. The date matched the week Abeni had collapsed from exhaustion at a public health rally. She had begged for emergency access to restricted funds for a cholera outbreak. She had been denied. He remembered her voice hoarse from shouting, her fingers trembling as she held the rejection letter. He hadn't known, not then. Now he did. He stood, legs unsteady, and grabbed the external drive. The air outside was thick. The night pressed in. He reached his car, threw the drive onto the seat, and slammed the door. His phone buzzed again. Zuri. Found more. Come now. He drove with his jaw clenched, fingers digging into the wheel. The city passed in streaks of orange streetlights and flashing billboards. He barely blinked. His mind raced ahead of him. Zuri's apartment was already lit when he arrived. She stood at the kitchen table, hair tied back, arms buried in paper files and clippings. A cigarette smoldered in a tray beside her. You look like hell, she said, without looking up. Not hell, Jelani muttered. Just the truth. He dropped the drive beside her. Zuri picked it up, inserted it into her laptop. Her eyes scanned fast, then paused. You sure this is clean? Double-traced. Used OBA's silent protocol. If they flag it, they'll only see a burst of static from Iceland. Zuri whistled low. Good. She pulled out a file from under the stack. This showed up on my desk this morning, she said. Anonymous envelope. Inside was a printed itinerary. A photograph. Minister Bako again, smiling next to Kwame, shaking hands, standing in front of a building labeled Benedictus Health Consortium. Abeni's foundation name had been edited in small print beneath it, but the logo was warped, slightly off. Forgery. Zuri tapped the paper. They're using Mama's name. Still, Jelani sat down. He stared at the photo. His hands trembled slightly. They gutted her. Zuri nodded. He whispered, We bring this to the press. Zuri hesitated. Not yet. Not like this. He looked up. Why not? She turned the laptop toward him. Because the trail didn't end there. She had dug deeper. Another transaction. $500,000 redirected into a lobbying fund. The signature on the release form was Abeni's. His blood froze. That's not hers. No, Zuri said quietly. It's forged. She enlarged the signature, overlaid it with an older form from years ago. They copied her name, pixel perfect, but look here. She pointed. Abeni signs with a soft hook at the base of the N. This one's straight. It's close, but not her hand. Jelani exhaled. Kwame. Zuri leaned back. They made it look like she gave them permission, used her credibility, made her complicit in stealing her own legacy. The silence grew heavy. Jelani stood. His chest burned. We expose it. Zuri didn't move. They'll say she lied, that she signed willingly. I don't care. She'll get dragged again. He paused, then nodded, but not alone this time. Zuri's voice dropped to a whisper. We need to hit them from all sides. Oba's in court tomorrow, Jelani said. We'll pass him the trail. Let him bleed them legally. Zuri reached into a drawer, pulled out a voice recorder. Take this, she said. Start with the accountant. His name's in the metadata. If we can get him to talk, it's over. Jelani took it, slipped it into his coat. Zuri walked him to the door. Outside, the wind had shifted. Colder, drier. She touched his shoulder. Be careful, she said. He didn't answer. He walked into the dark. The accountant lived on the edge of the city, in a modest apartment that didn't match the bank accounts tied to his name. Jelani waited until dawn before knocking. The man opened the door with tired eyes and an unshaven face. His name was Jonah. He blinked, recognizing nothing, until Jelani stepped forward, holding a printed bank record. Jonah's eyes widened. His mouth opened, closed. I don't want to make trouble, he muttered. Then don't, Jelani replied. Just tell the truth. They sat in silence for a while. Then Jonah spoke. They told me it was for restructuring, that the funds were being relocated to a faster pipeline, that the woman, Abeni, was aware. They showed me her signature, even had a video of her thanking donors. Jelani froze. What video? Jonah shrugged. A clip. Looked real. You thought she knew? Jonah nodded. But now, I don't know anymore. Jelani reached for the recorder. Will you say that again? Jonah's hand shook. If I do, I lose everything. If you don't, Jelani said, so does everyone else. The man looked down. After a long silence, he nodded. Jelani clicked the recorder on. When he returned to the apartment, Zuri was asleep at her desk. Jelani placed the recorder beside her and sat down slowly. The sun had risen, but it felt no warmer. He stared out the window, then finally spoke to no one. They turned our mother into a ghost. Now we turn their silence into fire. Inside his coat, the voice recorder still ticked. 4 minutes of testimony, enough to start a war. The article dropped at 6:43 a.m., 19 minutes earlier than scheduled. The newsroom was still half lit, coffee still brewing in the corner, but the servers hummed like a living thing. Across the city, mobile phones pinged. Notifications flared. Headlines crawled across digital tickers. Talk radio sputtered to life, and by the time the sun lifted fully over the skyline, the name, Kwame Otieno, was no longer just a name. It was an alarm. Zuri stood by the window, her arms folded across her chest, watching the city wake in chaos. Her laptop screen behind her still glowed with the final proof. Her byline, in bold. Benedictus betrayed, the man who stole from the sick, then left his wife to die. She didn't sip her coffee. She didn't blink. She only listened. Outside, horns honked more urgently than usual. Inside, her inbox exploded. The notifications blurred. Journalists, watchdogs, news anchors, law firms, former colleagues, and 3 unread messages from someone claiming to be a nurse from Abeni's surgery wing. Zuri didn't answer any of them. She closed the laptop, tied her scarf, and waited. By 8:12 a.m., Oba called. Zuri, it's gone nuclear. She didn't need to ask. I know. He's trending in 7 countries. They're pulling him from a health summit in Berlin. Sponsors are dropping. Good. Don't leave your apartment alone, he added. You know what happens when men like him get desperate. She didn't reply, just ended the call. The screen buzzed again. Private number. Then again. Then silence. Her chest tightened. She opened her window to let the wind in. The city smelled sharper now. Rain from last night still clung to the rooftops. But something had shifted. There was electricity in the air. And dread. By 10:04 a.m., the first televised debate began. Footage of Kwame standing at luxury fundraisers rolled beside images of collapsed rural clinics. Abeni's name was spoken, then whispered, then screamed. Old video clips of her fighting for clean water, clutching a protest sign with bruised knuckles, filled the screens. Zuri watched none of it. Instead, she sat quietly at her kitchen table, spreading out every note, photo, and voice recording she had. She knew it wouldn't last. The truth never did. She was right. By 1:17 p.m., a video surfaced. It hit the smaller gossip channels first, then the social platforms, then the morning talk shows. Abeni, in a hospital corridor, smiling, leaning into a man in a white coat. She was laughing. The man touched her wrist. She leaned closer. He whispered something. Then the camera froze on a frame, her hand on his chest. And the title, Wife of Whistleblower, engaged in long-term affair with doctor. Triplets, not husbands. Zuri's mouth went dry. She replayed the video, frame by frame. Something was off, too smooth, too scripted. The lighting didn't match hospital records. The background blurred conveniently. The badge on the man's coat was generic. But it was good. Too good. Zuri stood. Her pulse climbed. She called Jelani. I saw it, he said before she spoke. It's fake, she said. I know it is, but it looks convincing. He exhaled sharply. People are already reposting it. They're saying your article was revenge, that Mama cheated and got caught, that the whole thing was a smear job by bitter kids. Someone called Abeni a clout chaser in the comments section, Zuri whispered. Jelani cursed under his breath. They built the lie overnight. No, she said, her voice trembling. They had it ready. They were just waiting for us to speak. Silence. Then, we need a tech expert. Someone to confirm the video's fake. Fast. Zuri nodded. She hung up, then called an old contact, an editor she hadn't spoken to in years, a man who owed her a favor after she buried a scandal he never deserved to survive. By 3:03 p.m., she had a name, a studio, off-grid, downtown. She grabbed her bag, pulled on her boots. Rain returned, soft and windless. But she didn't run. The studio smelled of solder and coffee and regret. A thin man with wild hair and tremors in his hands greeted her with a crooked smile. You brought the file? Zuri nodded. He plugged in. His fingers danced. Minutes passed. Then he leaned back, pushed up his glasses. It's deep fake, he said. One of the better ones I've seen. Can you prove it? He grinned, yellow-toothed. I can dissect it. He pulled up the frame. See this shadow, he said, zooming in. The lighting on her cheek doesn't match the source light from this hallway window. It was lifted, probably from old footage. Her laugh was patched in. Poorly. He clicked again. Her iris reflection doesn't match the man's shirt color. No color bleed. Dead giveaway. Zuri stared at the screen. Her fingers dug into the edge of the chair. Can you write a full report? I already started. Add your signature, credentials, license. He nodded. She exhaled. Then her phone rang. Oba. She picked up. Abeni saw the video, he said. Her heart clenched. Where is she? A hospital room. Same wing. She hasn't spoken since it aired. Nurses say she just keeps turning the TV on and off. Zuri didn't speak. Oba continued, voice rough. She asked for you. Zuri was already moving. By the time she reached the hospital, the sun had disappeared behind thick clouds. The corridors felt colder, more metallic. The lights buzzed overhead like insects. She entered the room. Abeni was sitting upright. Her hands trembled. The remote lay on the sheets near her hip. Zuri stepped in. Abeni turned slowly. Her face looked thinner, eyes darker. But there was something deeper, a quiet ruin that no surgery could mend. Zuri sat beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Abeni's voice came, barely more than breath. They believe it. Zuri closed her eyes. They want to. Abeni stared at the window. The lie is easier, cleaner, more entertaining. Zuri reached into her bag, laid the printed analysis on the table. It's fake, she said. We can prove it. Abeni didn't blink. They won't care. Zuri's throat burned. I do. She opened her wallet, pulled out the small folded photo, the ultrasound. Abeni's hand moved slowly, took it. She stared, then whispered. They were real, every heartbeat. Zuri nodded. Her voice broke. We know. The rain began again, this time harder. The window fogged. Outside, the world argued, laughed, spun rumors like thread. Inside, a mother and daughter sat in silence, holding truth like a fragile flame. The storm had only begun, but something had shifted. Not just the news, not just public opinion. Something older, something louder, a vow returning. The courtroom lights buzzed like trapped insects. Sweat clung to the back of Oba's neck beneath his collar. He didn't move. Neither did the jury. No one blinked. Not when the bailiff swore in the witness. Not when the judge cleared his throat. Not when Amara stepped onto the stand in a silk blouse the color of blood. She adjusted the microphone. The sound of her breath echoed across the chamber. The public benches creaked. Outside, a protest crowd gathered, angry, hopeful, hungry for truth, or at least for spectacle. Oba stood at the defense table, hands flat, jaw locked. Amara folded her hands. I never wanted to do this, she began, her voice soft, almost trembling. But there are things the public doesn't know, things Abeni kept from everyone, even from Kwame. The prosecutor leaned forward. Amara turned to the judge. Your Honor, she said, I have an audio recording, one that will explain everything. Oba's heart sank. This wasn't in the pretrial disclosures. The judge raised a brow. Is the defense aware of this submission? She claims it's newly discovered, the prosecutor replied. We received it just this morning, under seal. Oba opened his mouth. But the judge was already nodding. Proceed. The bailiff carried over a flash drive, inserted it into the courtroom system. Static filled the air. Then, a woman's voice, Abeni's voice. The room froze. I never loved him, the voice said, breathy and low. Not really. I only married him for the money. And the kids, they're not even his. Gasps spread like fire. No, Zuri whispered from the gallery. Fists clenched. Jelani gritted his teeth, shaking his head. That's not her, that's not her. Oba stepped forward. Objection, he barked. We challenge the authenticity of this audio, but the judge raised a hand. Let the witness finish. On the stand, Amara dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. I tried to protect him, she said, but she manipulated everyone, even me. That woman, Abeni. She was never the victim. Oba looked up at the jury. One woman's eyes had filled with doubt. A man in the front row tapped his pen nervously. Another shifted in his seat. It was working. Amara smiled faintly. Oba turned to the judge. "We demand forensic analysis," he said. "This recording was not submitted properly. Its chain of custody is unknown, and it contains phrases Abeni would never use." The judge looked at him, then at Amara, then at the jury. He nodded. "I'll allow temporary admission pending verification, but the jury will treat it with caution." Too late. The damage was done. The seed had been planted. Outside, media vans multiplied. Journalists lined the courthouse steps. The air reeked of sweat, perfume, and ambition. Abani's name was already trending again, for all the wrong reasons. Inside, the prosecutor stepped forward. "Miss Amara, one more question." She nodded. "Why did you wait until now?" Amara looked down, then back up, eyes glassy. "I was afraid," she whispered, "but I couldn't live with the lie anymore." She stepped down, clutching her purse, passed by Oba with a brief glance. A flicker of victory in her lips, Oba sat back. This was no longer a case. It was a performance, and they were losing. The judge called recess. In the hallway, Zuri paced like a caged animal. "She's lying," she spat. "And that audio? It's a Frankenstein edit. Half the phrases are ripped from old speeches. I can prove it." Jelani pulled out his phone. "The audio analyst I spoke to last week, he's running the waveform now, said something's off. Pacing, tonal overlaps, but it'll take hours to get a full breakdown." Oba ran a hand over his face. "We don't have hours," he said. "They're not just questioning our evidence anymore. They're questioning her, Mama." Zuri slammed her hand against the bench. "She's in a hospital bed, barely breathing. And this is what they do to her?" Oba looked down, then slowly opened his briefcase. He took out a file, stared at it. The original financial trail, forged signatures, the hush money payments, and Jonah's testimony on tape. But it wasn't enough anymore. Not when the public didn't want truth. They wanted simplicity, villain, victim, twist, closure. Zuri stepped closer. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said, voice low. Oba looked up. She pulled out a sealed envelope from her coat. "I got this yesterday, from someone anonymous. It's a court-sealed paternity request from years ago, never processed. Kwame ordered it, but he never filed it." Oba opened it. Inside, 3 slips. "Request for DNA verification," all marked unsubmitted. He stared at the dates. They matched the year the triplets were born. Zuri whispered. He always knew they were his. He just needed a reason to say they weren't. Oba folded the papers. The pieces were aligning, slowly, bloodily. Back in the courtroom, the mood had shifted. The judge re-entered. "All rise." Oba stood. This time no trembling. He stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said, "the defense calls no new witness at this moment. But we request that the jury be reminded that emotional testimony is not the same as legal evidence." The judge nodded, then turned to the prosecutor. "Any further exhibits?" The man smiled. "Only this, Your Honor." He handed over a printed transcript of the audio. Highlighted, labeled. Oba's stomach churned. Then he turned to look at the gallery. A face stared back. Old, stern, familiar. A man in judicial robes, silver beard, sitting quietly, observing. Zuri noticed him too. Her eyes widened. She leaned in, whispered in Oba's ear. "That's Neo's father, Chief Justice Adeyemi. He's watching." Oba's breath caught. Zuri's husband. The man she'd married in silence, quietly, strategically. The man who now sat as a silent witness. Oba turned back to the front, spoke again, then let us all listen again, entirely. Not the clipped phrases, not the edited points, the whole conversation. The judge hesitated, then nodded. The full audio played. This time, there were gaps, flaws, discontinuities. The courtroom leaned in, a juror raised a brow, and when the tape ended, there was a pause. A question, not spoken aloud, but present. A crack in the wall. Abeni's truth might be real. Oba sat down, and for the first time in days he let himself breathe, until a rustle, a slip of paper. A court clerk delivered a message to the bench. The judge read it, then looked up. Court will resume tomorrow for expert witness testimony on audio authenticity. Jury is instructed to withhold judgment until confirmation. Gavel struck. Court dismissed. Oba stood. Zuri reached for his arm, but he didn't move. Across the room, Amara stepped into the corridor, surrounded by flashing lights, eager microphones, and a tide of reporters who now called her the woman brave enough to speak. Oba watched her go, then turned. Behind him, in the last row, Abeni's hospital nurse stood alone. She held something in her hands, a phone, playing a message Oba couldn't yet hear. But her eyes said everything. There was more, and it was coming. The courtroom lights flickered once, then held. Camera shutters snapped. The jury filed in, faces unreadable, posture tense. And on the witness stand sat Jelani, back straight, jaw locked, fingers wrapped around a leather-bound folder. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The final day. Everyone felt it. Judge Maroa leaned forward, her voice crisp. Mr. Jelani Nkemdicha, do you swear to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. The oath landed like iron on stone. Oba gave a barely perceptible nod from the defense table. Zuri sat behind him, notebook open, eyes trained on every twitch of the jury. Abeni wasn't in the room, but her absence was a presence itself, an ache in every corner. Jelani began. I work in high-risk financial audits, he said. My job is to trace money no one wants found. A few jurors leaned in. In this case, Jelani continued, I was looking into the disappearance of over $4.3 million in public health funds, money earmarked for malnutrition programs and emergency maternal care. He clicked a remote. A screen lit up with redacted transaction lines. This is where it started, but that's not where it ends. He flipped to the next slide. Names appeared. Kwame Otieno, Amara Sila, a third, Minister Bako. The courtroom stilled. Jelani's voice didn't waver. These three entities were involved in a series of transfers using a shell company called Veritas Holdings. The funds moved through Veritas to offshore accounts in Zurich and the Cayman Islands. The prosecution stood. Objection, these documents have already been authenticated by the Department of Financial Investigations, Oba said calmly, standing as well, and notarized. The judge raised a brow. Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Nkemdicha. Jelani moved to the final slide. This is the most recent withdrawal, $500,000. The same week, Abeni Otieno was denied emergency treatment. These funds were rerouted under forged authorization, using her name. Gasps broke through. One juror covered her mouth. Another leaned back, shaking his head. Then Jelani took out a portable audio speaker, placed it on the table. This recording, he said, is from Jonah Wekisa, the accountant who processed those withdrawals. He pressed play. Jonah's voice came through, hesitant, but clear. They told me she'd approved it, showed me a clip, said she didn't want the funds traced. I didn't know it was fake. I didn't know the signature was forged. They made it look real. Then silence. Jelani turned back to the judge. I have one more exhibit. He pulled out a sealed envelope, walked it to the bailiff. The judge opened it. Her brows lifted. This, Jelani said, is a forensic report from Elias Labs, a certified digital forensics firm. It confirms, unequivocally, that the audio recording submitted by the prosecution last week was synthetically generated, deep fake, spliced from archived interviews and unrelated conversations. The room exploded. Reporters gasped. Someone in the back dropped their pen. Amara, seated with the prosecution, went pale. Oba stood. We asked the court to strike the previous audio from the record and to consider obstruction and tampering charges. The prosecutor stood too, but the judge held up her hand. The motion is under review. Jury will disregard the prior audio as evidence until further ruling. Zuri exhaled for the first time in an hour, but Oba wasn't finished. He rose. "Your Honor," he said, his voice gaining weight, "we have one more matter to address." He opened a thin file and placed 3 sealed test results on the table. These are DNA confirmations from the National Medical Institute, collected via court-sanctioned testing, witnessed and notarized. The judge frowned. "You're implying paternity results?" "Yes, Your Honor." Oba walked toward the jury box. "For years, my client has been publicly humiliated, labeled promiscuous. Her children, called illegitimate. Today, we end that lie." He turned to the jury. "All 3 results confirm, beyond any doubt, that Oba Nkemdiche, Jelani Nkemdiche, and Zuri Nkemdiche are the biological children of Kwame Otieno." A collective inhalation swept the room. Zuri blinked hard, lips parted. Jelani closed his eyes. Oba's voice dropped. "Kwame knew. We discovered 3 old paternity request forms. He never filed them, but he knew." He returned to the defense table. Oba was done, but Zuri wasn't. She stood, walked forward, not summoned, not called, but undeniable. The judge narrowed her eyes. "State your name for the record." "Zuri Nkemdiche," she said. "Journalist, daughter of Abeni Otieno." And she reached into her coat pocket, took out a wedding ring, held it up. Wife of Neo Adeyemi. Silence cracked open like thunder. The gallery shifted. The jury froze. Zuri looked directly at the judge and daughter-in-law of Chief Justice Adeyemi. The judge blinked. "Your point, Ms. Nkemdiche." Zuri stepped closer. "My point is this. I married a man not for power, not for privilege, but for truth. And his father, your colleague, sat in this courtroom and watched every moment. You say this court cannot be bought. Then let this be your moment to prove it." She laid the ring on the table. "My mother gave everything to build what this city now wants to forget. We won't let that happen." The judge stared at her, long, then looked to the jury. The courtroom trembled, not with noise, but with weight, with truth no longer whispered, but standing tall, unshaken. Outside, thunder cracked, rain returned, and in the distance, across radios, across rooftops, across the city's spine, a chant began to rise. Not loud, not choreographed, just honest. "Abeni, Abeni, Abeni." Inside the courtroom, Oba looked to his sister and brother. Zuri's eyes were glass. Jelani's fists were tight, but in Oba's chest, for the first time, a fire he didn't have to hide burned clean. The judge stood. "We will adjourn for final deliberations." The gavel fell, but no one moved, because in that silence, Kwame slumped forward, his lips parted, and for the first time since this all began, he had no words. The handcuffs clicked shut. Kwame flinched as the steel bit into his wrists. Flashbulbs exploded outside the courthouse doors. Reporters shouted his name like a warning, not a celebration. His suit, tailored, once immaculate, was soaked at the collar with sweat. His smile had vanished. So had the crowd that once applauded him. Behind him, the judge's sentence still echoed down the marbled hallways. Fraud, perjury, willful obstruction of justice. repeated acts of malicious defamation. The defendant is hereby remanded to state custody pending further sentencing. The door slammed shut behind him. He was gone, but the silence he left behind thundered louder than applause. Zuri stood beside her mother on the courthouse steps, fingers laced around Abeni's. Jelani flanked the other side, his arm a steady anchor. Oba stood one step down, fielding a storm of questions with his usual unflinching calm. Abeni didn't speak. She didn't have to. The cameras captured her silence like scripture. The woman they'd once called a liar, a gold digger, a disgrace, now walked upright, wrapped in the storm she had survived, and the world watched. The chants began slowly, then swelled. Abeni, Abeni, Abeni. Across the square, protest signs turned into praise banners. Dignity restored. Mother of truth. Someone held up the ultrasound photo Zuri had published in her exposé. Enlarged, laminated. Beneath it, 3 words. She never lied. But amid the celebration, a figure moved hesitantly through the crowd. Mari, the sister who had shut her door. The woman whose silence had cut sharper than Kwame's betrayal. She stepped forward, clutching a wrapped parcel to her chest. Her eyes red, her knees trembling. Abeni saw her. The crowd fell quiet. Zuri stiffened. Jelani stepped forward. Oba raised a hand but didn't stop anything. Mari stopped 2 feet from the steps. Her voice cracked. I watched the trial, she whispered. Every second, I didn't believe, not because I thought you were lying, but because I was ashamed I hadn't stood with you. She held out the parcel. Abeni didn't move. Ma'ari unwrapped it herself. Inside was a blouse, soft cotton, familiar pattern, purple and white. It's yours, Mari said, her voice shaking. Mama kept it. Said it was the one you wore when you opened the clinic. I kept it hidden because I didn't want to remember how much smaller I became when you stood tall. The crowd held its breath. Then Abeni reached forward, took the blouse, folded it carefully, and for the first time in 2 decades, smiled at her sister. It wasn't wide, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Mari collapsed to her knees. I'm sorry, she wept. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Abeni bent, lifted her gently by the arm. You still can, she said. The crowd erupted again. By the time they reached the car, Amara was already standing by the sidewalk, her face a pale ruin of mascara and ruined pride. She wasn't in cuffs, not yet, but her eyes gave her away. She took a step forward, then stopped. Her voice was barely a breath. I took the money. I helped him forge the forms. I leaked the deep fake. It wasn't just him. It was me. I thought I'd win something, but I lost everything. No one answered. She fell to her knees. I don't want mercy, she whispered. Just truth. Zuri opened the car door. Oba helped Abeni inside. Jelani lingered, his eyes unreadable. Then he said softly, Truth has already arrived. The door shut. Amara sat in silence on the concrete as the car pulled away. That night, Abeni stood on the balcony of Zuri's apartment. The city pulsed beneath her, lights like fireflies, voices rising from cafes and news studios, all echoing the same name she once tried to protect in silence. Quam's assets were being frozen, the offshore accounts dismantled. The board of Benedictus Trust had resigned in disgrace. Investigations into Minister Bacco were underway. Anonymous emails had leaked every file Oba had submitted to court. It was no longer a story. It was a reckoning. Inside, Zuri brewed tea. Jelani scrolled through his phone. Oba was on a late-night call with the district attorney. Abeni closed her eyes, then turned. She stepped inside. walked to the old trunk Zuri had placed in the center of the room. It was made of oak, scuffed at the corners, leather-wrapped with tarnished brass hinges. She opened it. Inside was a single envelope, unmarked, fragile. She lifted it out, opened it. A check from years ago, unused, made out to the Benedictus Trust. Amount, 100 zirps, signed by Kwame. It was a symbolic gesture from the early days, when he tried to appear generous to the press. She had kept it as a joke, a reminder. She turned the check over, wrote something on the back in ink. Then she stood. Zuri looked up. Abeni handed her the check. "This is the first donation," she said. "For what?" Zuri asked. Abeni smiled. "The rebuilding fund. For women who've been silenced." Zuri's eyes welled. "We'll name it after you." "No," Abeni said. "Name it after the truth." That week, the courts officially returned full control of the foundation to Abeni. The judge signed the order in front of 6 news cameras. Amara entered a plea deal and cooperated fully. Minister Bako was suspended. The medical fraud web unraveled like threads soaked in fire. And in the middle of it all, Abeni stood like stone. 1 month later, she returned to the community that once threw stones at her children. But this time, she wasn't alone. She walked beside Oba, Jelani, and Zuri, hand in hand. No microphones, no speeches, just the sound of gravel underfoot. They stopped in front of the listening stone, still in the backyard, still silent. Oba knelt first, then Jelani, then Zuri. Abeni placed her palm on the stone, whispered something no one else heard, and the wind answered, no longer cold, but full of life. The truth had roared, and the silence would never be the same. There are stories we carry in silence, stories etched not in ink, but in bone, stories that never made headlines, but live inside the corners of kitchens, hospital beds, courtrooms, and late-night whispers, stories of dignity denied and dignity reclaimed, not through force, but through endurance, through that quiet, stubborn faith that truth, though delayed, never dies. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in parades or breaking news. Sometimes it arrives in fragments, slow, tender, trembling, a signature revealed, a lie exposed, a child believed, a wound that finally stops bleeding. And in those moments, those ordinary miracles, we learn that justice isn't the absence of pain. It's the refusal to let pain define us. That strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the choice to keep standing when the world turns its back, to speak when every voice tells you to stay quiet, to hold the line, even if your hands shake. What this story reminds us, more than anything, is that truth doesn't need to shout. It waits, it watches, it listens. And when it rises, it does not ask permission. It teaches us that there is power in being underestimated, that silence can be weaponized, but it can also be sacred, that no amount of scandal, betrayal, or cruelty can erase the worth of a life rooted in compassion. Because in the end, truth is not just something to be proven in a courtroom. It's something we live, in the way we choose to protect one another, in how we teach our children to hold their heads high, in how we apologize when we finally find the courage, in how we forgive, not to excuse the wound, but to stop it from owning us. Some may inherit legacies of privilege, others inherit broken glass, unanswered questions, and names no one dares speak. But what defines us is not what we are handed. It's what we build from the ruins, what we protect, what we choose to remember. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is enough to shake the world awake. Thank you for walking this journey with us. If this story touched you, if it stirred something in you, Share your thoughts in the comments. Let your voice be part of the conversation. And if you'd like to be here for more stories that hold truth, fire, and healing in the same breath, subscribe to the channel, follow our work, and stay with us for what comes next. Truth doesn't end here. It only begins.